you to our monthly webinar series and give you a little bit of background on eSig. For those of you who are not familiar with eSig, we're a membership-based nonprofit organization providing our members with objective information and resources for renewable energy and energy systems integration decisions, peer-to-peer networking opportunities, information and knowledge sharing, and professional education experiences. Our most recent activity was our fall technical workshop in Denver about 3 weeks ago. And our next activity will be the spring technical workshop outside of Albuquerque in March, followed by an international energy systems integration workshop in London. These workshops deal with the full range of issues associated with integrating wind and solar into electric, gas, and thermal systems, and coupling to energy-consuming infrastructures, especially electric transportation, buildings, and industry. Registration will open soon, and everyone is invited to attend. eSig is a very unique organization, and I don't think you'll find anything quite like it anywhere else. If you're new to eSig, I strongly encourage you to follow up with us if you like what you hear, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. You can find us at www.esig.energy. Okay, just a few logistical matters before we get started. First of all, the phones will be muted for the duration of the webinar to avoid unnecessary distractions. So please use the question and answer box. You see it there on the lower right-hand side of your screen. Use that to submit questions, and we'll save 10 or 15 minutes at the end for the Q&A. We plan to wrap it up at the top of the hour, and an email with a link will be provided once the presentation and the audio file have been posted. Okay, so today our webinar will feature Rob Gramlich, founder and president of Grid Strategies, a consulting firm dealing with the integration of clean energy into the electric grid. Rob has been working on grid modernization and expansion efforts since the mid-90s. Through senior positions in government and the private sector, he has developed and led initiatives on renewable energy integration, market design, and transmission policy. Rob oversaw transmission policy for the American Wind Energy Association from 2005 through 2016 as Senior VP for Government and Public Affairs, Interim CEO and Policy Director. He was also Economic Advisor to FERC Chairman Pat Wood from 2001 to 2005. Rob has testified before the U.S. Congress, the U.S. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, and state regulatory commissions. He's served on advisory committees for the U.S. Department of Energy, the North American Energy Standards Board, on boards of a number of regional clean energy organizations, as Vice Chair of the Business Council for Sustainable Energy, and as Interim Executive Director of the Wind Energy Foundation. I've known Rob for a little over 10 years. We've worked together on a number of wind initiatives during that time, and I consider him a trusted colleague and a good friend. I'll tell you that he really knows his stuff, and I've come to greatly value his contributions to the industry, and we're very fortunate to have him here with us today. By the way, the last couple of webinars, I'd take a look on LinkedIn the night before, and Rob, what I found out was that we have 224 shared connections. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I'm getting a little worried about you, Rob. Our webinar today will examine the meaning of resilience and fuel security and how they relate to reliability. It will present the extent to which resilience is supported by generation as opposed to transmission and distribution. And finally, it will cover the role of renewable energy in providing reliability services and fuel security. So, okay, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. I think if Rob will come on now, I'm going to turn it over to him. Rob, go ahead.
Thanks, Charlie. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, hear you good.
Great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining. It's my pleasure to be on the eSig webinar. I've really enjoyed participating in eSig forums, seminars, etc. over the last, I think it's 15 years. I think I went when I was at FERC and we were talking about market design in a high renewable energy penetration world. And it's amazing, every 6 months or so, there's new research coming out or experiences from some country or another that all get shared at what is now eSig, used to be UIG and UVIG. And it's really the main place I go to learn about all of those developments. I look forward to everybody's questions and feedback on your screen right now. You can see our website. You can send an email through that, and of course through web software here, put in the question for today. Grid Strategies is my company. It's me and Michael Goggin, who many of you may know if you've been going to ESIG. Some of the what I'll be presenting here will be from a report that he and I did along with our friends and colleagues, Allison Silverstein. Well, this report was with Allison Silverstein, me and Michael. So let me proceed here and dive in. So you've heard a lot of news about fuel security, resilience, and reliability. If you follow the electric industry trade press at all, it's pretty much a recurring theme. FERC has said it's its top priority, and it's what the Trump administration is talking about, and then many RTOs separately, and even before them, we're talking about some of these topics. And you hear about some of these bullets here in terms of potential concerns: loss of baseload generation, cyber attack, increasingly severe weather, which affects different regions differently. But most regions have one or more of those forms of severe weather. Generator performance problems during cold weather, polar vortex, for example. And then for a long time, people have been thinking about and worried about electromagnetic pulse, geomagnetic disturbance. That work's still going on. And then loss of system inertia. So some of these are, I think, a little bit more serious than others. Some are being addressed and evaluated, but these are the issues that at least are grabbing people's attention to focus on what people call fuel security, resilience, reliability, and we're going to try to sort out what those terms are, how they're different from each other, and what we should do about them. Okay, so starting with kind of the Washington policy environment, I'm in the Washington area and do a lot of work with FERC and DOE. So when you have even the president talking about a 202 order, which I think only I know of maybe 5 other people who knew what a 202 was before a year ago. These issues get serious because DOE has a very strong authority to exercise emergency reliability authority or utilize the Defense Production Act. So when Secretary Perry was directed by the president to come up with a plan addressing the retirements of coal and nuclear plants, and then Secretary Perry used the authority that he has to put a proposed rule, notice of proposed rulemaking before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, which he did in September 2017. Suddenly this is a very significant policy initiative. The stated concerns by DOE and the White House were about premature generation retirements, not really defining what premature meant, and then lack of compensation for an attribute called resilience, and then harms to energy security, national security, and public safety. So these are taking the form of the NOPR, and then there was recently a leaked memo from the National Security Council, or involving them, talking about how the administration may act to use those authorities. So we still don't know if that's going to happen. There's been no word recently. A lot of people think that they're waiting to get their nominee onto FERC, who could approve the important cost recovery decisions that would be needed for such a policy. And so, that could happen by the end of the year. So it could be just we're waiting till the beginning of the year on that one. So I guess that's where those initiatives stand at this point. The proposed rule, the NOPR that Secretary Perry put before FERC, was addressed almost a year ago, January 2018, it was rejected by a 5-0 unanimous vote. However, the Commission opened up a proceeding. We're getting a little background noise here. I don't know if Brian or Charlie, we can mute others. But the Commission opened a proceeding looking at the issue to develop a record. It decided there wasn't a sufficient record to act in that January order, but it did open up this proceeding to get industry comments. So some of the comments that came in, I think, were particularly significant. NERC itself filed and talked about resilience, and that has not been very well understood or commonly understood in terms of its meaning or how it relates to reliability. And NERC was quite clear that resilience is an element of reliability, and part of what it called an adequate level of reliability, and essentially being addressed through current processes. It noted that it has recently worked on a set of essential reliability services, and those have some solid engineering definition. So there wasn't, sort of in NERC's view, a need for a whole new category. A number of other interests filed and suggested that resilience is really more of an issue about distribution systems and not a market design issue, requiring new or different generation services. The RTOs all filed as they had been requested to. They noted a number of things going on with transmission planning and other areas. They did not identify generation-related issues generally, but there were a couple of exceptions. The California ISO did mention inverter setting, and that's separate from what we're talking about today. There's a lot of work going on, of course, on that. And then PJM and ISO noted an issue related to the polar vortex type issues, so interpeak energy systems, given their increasing reliance on natural gas. And in the wintertime, of course, that gas is desired for cooling or space heating. And at least in ISO New England's past case, they have gas import constraints. So those two RTOs were raising concern about generation there.
Hey, Rob, this is Charlie here. Can I break in for just a moment?
Sure.
There's a suggestion on the line that if you try to mute and unmute yourself, you can see if the problem is on your line. All the other lines appear to be muted.
Okay, I just muted and unmuted. I'll mute again. Well, that's odd. I don't know where it's coming from. Did it change at all?
It seemed to be a little better for a short time, maybe while you were muted. I couldn't quite tell. The other alternative is for you to call in and go on mute and call in. But I don't have that number right at my fingertips.
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay, sorry for this technical difficulty. I think Rob is trying to call in on the landline instead of dialing over the computer. See if that makes a difference.
Charlie, I'm dialed in on the phone. You can hear me.
I think it's better now, Rob. Well, I think I may be part of the problem. I'm going to go on mute, and I think it's better with you on the line.
Okay, I'm speaking on the computer. I keep getting unmuted on the computer. So I'll go like this unless you tell me to do something different. I don't think you can hear my phone connection.
I can hear you, but there's still a lot of noise on the line.
Well, it couldn't be quieter where I am, so I don't know where it's coming from.
All right, let's go ahead and see how it goes.
Okay. So the ball is in FERC court now on that resilience proceeding. They may end up looking at each region individually. They may provide some national guidance. But we haven't heard anything from FERC for almost a year on the topic. So to compare resilience and reliability a little bit, I'm going to draw from a report that I mentioned Allison Silverstein, Michael Goggin, and I wrote. It's at the website there on the off of the Grid Strategies website if you want to look at that. We've included an analysis of resilience and reliability as well as some recommendations for how to use limited resources and sort of where the focus should be. In terms of the meaning of reliability and resilience, get everybody on the same page here. FERC defined resilience, and this ended up being fairly commonly accepted, as the ability to withstand and reduce the magnitude and duration of disruptive events, which includes the capability to anticipate, absorb, adapt to, and or rapidly recover from such an event.
Rob, just one other question, Rob. Charlie here again. Is there any other source of noise in your office there? Any electronic equipment that you think might be emitting something that could be turned off?
I'll turn off my phone. The phone's gone, but I'm just sitting in a quiet office. So.
Yeah, it didn't seem to help. Let's see if we can carry on.
So NERC defines reliability of the whole power system requires the resilience to anticipate, withstand, recover, and adapt to events on the system. And that encompasses aspects of resilience. NERC has defined the adequate level of reliability, or ALR, to include resilience as a time-based component of reliability. So in other words, resilience is part of reliability, or a subset of reliability, which is what one of the commissioners, Cheryl LaFleur, had said in the proceeding. Or in the FERC order. Resilience, however, sometimes broader than reliability or broader than whole power system reliability, because there's a lot of resilience activity at the customer or distribution end of the system that NERC and FERC don't deal with. NERC and FERC and RTOs deal with the bulk power system.
Rob, we're starting to lose a lot of people. I'm wondering if I can ask everybody to hang up and dial back in again. Try to restart this from here. It's really, I think, too big a problem to try to continue like this. So can we hang up and log back on again? Start back up again in 5 minutes. Okay?
Hey, Rob.
Hey, Ryan. Don't seem to have any background noise.
What's that?
Sounds good right now.
Yep. I'm not sure what happened. Well, Charlie should be back any second. There he is. Okay, Charlie.
Okay. Are we still set up?
Yes.
Okay, I've lost my right-hand side. I can't see how many people are on or the Q&A box, but let's go ahead, and hopefully I can get the rest of this back again.
Yeah, we currently have 90 folks back online.
Okay.
Great. All right. Shall I continue?
Yeah, let's go ahead, Rob.
All right. Thanks, folks, for coming back and bearing with us. So some key resilience points from that report. Again, bulk power system reliability has been defined and managed to include resilience. So in other words, it's not a new concept in the reliability world. It should be focused from a regulatory perspective in terms of impact on customers. So time and resource and attention should be spent on those things that have the most impact on either preventing or recovering from loss of load events. Most outages are really caused by distribution problems, not generation or fuel supply, and by routine rather than huge events. Some threats are increasing, including significant events like hurricanes and wildfires, and do require resources and attention. And then cyber and physical attack are certainly growing concerns as well. Other issues have been around and are not fully addressed or understood yet, GMD and EMP. But still related to the generation area, there are questions about it, and we're going to get into that. Questions about the evolving fuel mix and whether reliability is assured under all scenarios and with different portfolios. And sometimes this relates to what people are calling fuel security. Sometimes it's loss of inertia from conventional plants that may be retiring. And then sometimes it's related to some of the new technologies on the system and distributed energy resources or microgrids. But again, budgets are limited and investments have opportunity costs, so regulators and utilities should maximize reliability and resilience impact per dollar by looking at measures that benefit customers most and measures that address multiple threats. Some of the specific activities that can improve reliability and resilience, both on the left side of the screen before the outage and then on the right side of the screen after the outage. You'll see things on the left side related to things like what people call hardening. But if you think of things like concrete towers in hurricane zones, that's the type of thing that we're looking at there. And then after the outage, having mutual assistance of utilities. If you've been through one and seen utility trucks from 5 states away, that's what we're talking about, as well as spare equipment like transformers that may be needed. So which of these are high and low value? So there are some areas on the left side that are, in our view, high value, things like tree trimming. In many of the windy events, hurricanes, et cetera, that we get here in the East, it's trees and wires that don't get along well together that cause a lot of the outages. So tree trimming is one of those things that where spending by utilities and actual work by utilities does not always go the way it should, but it can have a major impact. And then in contrast, on the right side, lower value, when you have high reserve margins, then spending money on generator capacity payments or subsidies for certain resources that don't tend to have much of an impact, and they're certainly not multi-threat relative to, say, transmission and distribution type investments. So now let's turn to, the title of this is fuel security. There's a lot, again, in the news, in the electric industry world about fuel security. So we're going to move into that issue. So I mentioned that the RTOs in their resilience comments didn't say much about generation issues. After all, reserve margins are so large in most of the country, especially in PJM, which was kind of ground zero or the main focus of a lot of the DOE and Trump administration focus. And so there were two RTOs. It was ISO New England and PJM who raised issues related to generation. PJM started in 2017 with this study that you can find on their website, PJM's Evolving Resource Mix and System Reliability. They found a few things in this report. They did find that reserve margins are ample right now, but in the long run, they're looking at different portfolios. It wasn't really about base load, though that had been sort of what people were talking about when the report came out. They defined base load to be units that typically do not cycle due to unit limitations or market economics, which right there in the definition, defining a resource by its limitation certainly doesn't indicate it has any special value. So it wasn't about base load. It wasn't really about diversity per se either, though diversity, all other things equal, is usually helpful, but you can have unreliable and diverse portfolios. So that's not the issue per se, nor was it necessarily a concern about renewable energy growth. Some of the high renewable scenarios were quite reliable. And even in this study, they were ignoring the new capabilities on things like voltage support, reactive power, and frequency response that are in all new wind and solar generators. But there was some focus, and this is where PJM started to turn towards the winter peak energy or the polar vortex type events, where they said a number of portfolios that they studied in this report did not withstand that type of scenario. So again, that was in 2017, and now further study is taking place in PJM that's really honing in more on that specific type of scenario. Of course, they had some near misses with some cold snaps where reserve margins got pretty low at the actual during the actual event, and there were concerns. They did make it through, but it was close a couple times. So the famous polar vortex in 2014 was the main one. So they're looking now at what they're calling a fuel security study. It's a scenario of an extended winter cold snap type of event, 14-day period. You can pull up this link or go on the PJM website and look around for fuel security, and you can see what scenarios they're looking at. They define fuel security here as the ability of the system's supply portfolio, given its fuel supply dependencies, to continue serving electricity demand through credible disturbance events such as coordinated physical or cyber attacks or extreme weather that can lead to disruptions in fuel delivery systems, which would impact the availability of generation over extended periods of time. So it sure sounds a lot like resource adequacy, and I think you would be right to say, isn't that what we've been doing? And it's not totally clear how this is different. They have a study coming up in about a week, and we'll see what PJM says about it. I think they've been through something like 300 runs of scenarios, so I'm sure it will at least be informative about different situations. I think, again, the main focus will be on this kind of extreme weather issue and kind of the winter peak supply situation. One thing on resilience is on this PJM congestion slide. This is a the bomb cyclone event. and you can see kind of the value of transmission. So again, even though it may look like some of these scenarios may seem to support the hypothesis that there is a generation issue, in many cases, it's not so much a generation issue as a transmission issue. In this event, you see a lot of price separation between an eastern area of PJM and a western area of PJM, where there were significant congestion costs adding up to $900 million worth in at that time. And so, that's an example of how, severe weather affecting one area more than another can be addressed if there's ample transmission from one area to the next. A similar thing was found in New England that we'll talk about in a minute. So let's move to New England when we're still trying to assess what exactly is the problem here. Is there a resource adequacy problem in these two regions, as has been claimed, or not? And it's certainly a worthy question to study. ISO New England is concerned, as they've stated it here, there may be insufficient energy available to the New England power system during extended cold winter weather conditions to satisfy electricity demand, given the system's evolving resource mix and fuel delivery infrastructure. So right off the bat, it's sounding a lot like PJM's concern, and a similar scenario being studied. And I know the regions, or the RTOs, are looking at what the other one's doing and learning from each other as they study this issue. ISO New England goes a little further by saying it's caused by reliance on just-in-time natural gas with regional gas import constraints and limited dual fuel capability. So the pipeline issue or constraints into New England are widely discussed and have been raised as a concern by the ISO for many years. And of course, it's a big debate about the need for those pipelines and permitting rules for the neighboring states that have not issued permits for pipelines to get into the region. But that is an issue that is widely discussed in New England. It's different from PJM. Of course, PJM is sitting on the Marcellus and the Utica Shale with plenty of pipelines going many directions with quite a bit of redundancy. So again, it'll be interesting to see how both regions end up coming out on their studies. It looks like the gas supply situation is quite different between the two regions. The latest we have from New England is in their operational fuel security analysis. It was updated once, I believe. There is active stakeholder debate about the assumptions that go into that. As with most analyses, the assumptions determine the results, and there are many cases where assumptions used by the ISO to develop these results were not the same as they had used in other instances for other studies in their processes. So things like energy efficiency, renewable energy, gas transmission, other things factor into these, and the assumptions make a big difference. It was notable that many of even in their initial study, many of the highest reliability scenarios were high renewable scenarios. So you see the little arrows pointing there to there's a high LNG with high renewables and higher retirements. So even with extra high retirements of conventional units, that was one of I think the second most reliable scenario. The first most isn't shown on the graph, but of all of the scenarios they studied, all but that one are shown. And then, of course, the next one is more renewables, and then two more is high renewables with high retirement. So again, it's not about renewables. Many of the high renewable scenarios are among the most reliable, but New England is concerned about this winter peak issue. The last bullet here although stakeholders are still debating the studies, ISO New England filed one very narrow proposal to FERC to address fuel security, just related to a couple of generating units. And FERC actually came back with an order over the couple months ago saying, actually, your entire region needs a whole new product called fuel security, and so you need to go back and develop a long-term proposal. So the stakeholders in New England are developing that proposal now to be filed next year. Well, so kind of following a sound public policy approach, you first try to define the problem, and then you look at what is the source of the problem, and can that source be sort of surgically addressed. So in that spirit, both PJM and New England are considering whether market designs are the source of any issues they have. Again, as we all still debate whether they have a resource adequacy issue or not. But there is a notable design issue in both regions, which, of course, as most people know, they rely heavily on their capacity markets, where load-serving entities have capacity obligations, and the RTOs administer an auction for capacity as distinct from energy and ancillary services. It's a long-term product based on resources' ability to meet summer peak. And both regions had issues with generator performance in the winter, and both have since instituted some changes. They call it pay for performance in New England, and in PJM they call it capacity performance. Similar in concept in that there are more incentives for generators that do or do not, or for actual performance during those events. So you can't just get a capacity payment and then call in sick when a scarcity event occurs. If you do so, you get a penalty. So those changes addressed a clear design flaw in those regions, in that capacity payments were not actually paying for delivered services. And that's a kind of a key economic point here I hope folks take away, is that, if you think about everything else that you buy in the economy, when you go out and buy stuff, you don't get pay the dishwasher repair person for being available to come to your house and fix a dishwasher. You pay when he fixes it, and as I'm doing this week. And that's pretty much true for everything else, but it wasn't true in capacity markets. Arguably is still not true in capacity markets. There's still some ways in which they are sort of a crude product that are not very carefully tailored to the actual service that's needed at the actual time. So yes, some design flaws were fixed, but maybe there are more that need to be improved upon. Another aspect in the last bullet here about design flaws is if generators are getting paid and yet they're subject to the same common mode failure, well, maybe their capacity value shouldn't be their full nameplate capacity with just an adjustment for their independent forced outage rate. Maybe the interaction between their outages and other generators' outages should be taken into account, which is just a kind of best practice statistics that some of our capacity markets don't actually follow. So last few slides here, and then we're going to have questions. Again, let's stipulate we've found a resource adequacy issue, and we've evaluated whether a simple design flaw could just be corrected. There's still another question, which is there a market failure? For example, you could say, sure, both regions found that there are some generation portfolios that would not be reliable, and there are other portfolios that are reliable. Well, whose job is it to actually find or choose the reliable ones? And are we going to rely on markets here or not? The typical economist's answer is, well, get the prices right. If you have efficient spot prices that happen when scarcity occurs, whether that's winter, summer, or any other time, which maybe we shouldn't be prejudging since they're happening. In fact, they just happened this week in one region. I think it might have been New England. And of course, all these winter peak events are not what the capacity markets were designed for. So whenever they occur, let the prices rise to what they may be, and that can trigger market responses. So load serving entities can do their job of hedging. That's how the Texas market works, for example. And you can see the forward prices are still pretty high for next summer, and that's leading market participants there to either add supply or reduce demand. That's not so. Again, just because there's a potential for an unreliable outcome doesn't mean that there should be a policy response. It means maybe there's a market response. That's still a step that we haven't been through in either the PJM or the New England case. Again, this could, we could look at and discover, well, maybe there's a design flaw where we don't have appropriate scarcity pricing. The price at that time probably shouldn't be just the fuel cost of the marginal unit dispatched. It should probably be higher. Usually that's set by the demand side in a normal market or a textbook market. We could fix that. But again, we don't necessarily need a new product. It could be that our existing products just need to be designed right. So in that vein, an important thing to keep in mind as the process proceeds here in these two regions, or really any other, if they're looking at a need, any system need, whether it's this kind of winter peak energy issue or something else, in theory, there might be a reliability need for a new product. Let's say we have 10-minute reserves and 30-minute reserves, and maybe there's something else, another reserve, or maybe another form of flexibility. Some countries have more flexibility products than our typical markets have here. Well, so in theory, that could be justified. Well, but if you do that, you really have to be careful to make sure the product is defined in a technologically neutral way. So, for example, it shouldn't be defined on supply attributes, which just describe characteristics of certain supply options. Rather, it should be based on what the buyer actually needs or wants, and the pricing should be based on delivered service of that actual service. So, I think the concept in the NERC essential reliability services are about right. The flexibility and frequency response, et cetera, described there are actual reliability needs, and RTOs can maybe, have a couple of products or define products based on those for, again, X and Y minute reserves, that sort of thing. But again, those are based on what the system needs and not defined based on supply attributes. Hopefully we'll get rid of the term spinning reserve and non-spinning. That kind of describes supply attributes, and we can get more to things that demand side and other providers can offer. So to wrap up here, let's see, second to last slide. Again, the two regions are talking about a generation or a resource adequacy issue. They're calling it fuel security. It might be, again, we're still evaluating whether it's needed, but a better definition of it might be winter extreme peak energy, right? That's what they need, and they need it over sort of a 10 to 14 day period, they're saying. It's not a fuel supply issue per se, since many other resources that don't have on-site fuel are still providing energy during the defined circumstances. And by the way, this is an energy product, not a capacity product, so it wouldn't be appropriate to procure it through the capacity market, which is what PJM has said it intends to do. They're talking about total megawatt hours over that 10 or 14 day period in order to, not run out of natural gas or oil or fuel during that period. But then the question is, again, is that even a new product if we have hourly pricing for energy and operating reserves? Isn't that already covering what we need just, during those circumstances? And maybe we should make sure scarcity pricing is done appropriately at those times. It's important to be technology neutral because there are resources that can deliver and could be attracted and retained in the market. Actually, wind energy has done quite well during these polar vortex or cold snap events. They're usually pretty windy periods. And both wind and solar provide a lot of megawatt hours. Again, not always capacity resources, but a lot of megawatt hours over whatever time period, so they can help save scarce BTUs of fuel. So again, those should be allowed into whatever product is being defined. And there are other resources outside of renewables as well. LNG imports have showed up very strongly in the ISO New England study as a solution that can be advanced procured and contracted for. Transmission showed up in the ISO New England, as well as I showed the slide of PJM as helping there. Hydro and other sources are capable of serving the need. So it's important to be technology neutral so that we let all technologies provide what they can do. So wrapping up, worthwhile next steps. Again, these winter resource adequacy assessments are still going on in PJM and New England, probably other regions. And of course, that's always worthwhile to study scenarios and provide information to regulators and market participants. And then on resilience specifically, the lessons from the FERC proceeding is that RTOs and planners, utilities around the country have a lot of work to do looking at plausible threats. Again, we've got intentional physical attacks, cyber threats, and severe weather affecting all regions in different ways. And, in many cases, these are potentially high impact, low frequency events that may be outside of the normal N-1 reliability criteria. But it seems worthwhile to study those and evaluate mitigation options and recovery options. So I think there will be a lot of work going on under the heading of resilience, whether that's sort of separate from reliability or part of it. I think it's more part of it, but it's certainly worthwhile to do. So I think we're going to see a lot of that activity. So Charlie, I will turn it back to you.
Hey.
Charlie, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, but I think I'm on mute.
We gotcha.
You got me. Okay, thank you. I had a problem here with my screen. So I just want to remind the participants here that we have the question and answer box down in the lower right-hand corner if you'd like to go ahead and engage in the conversation. We have one question here, Rob. Do you think there will need to be more coordination or alignment between the gas and electric markets before a fuel security product can be effectively defined?
Yes, that's a great question. The power systems need flexibility. They need resources to respond quickly, especially in the minutes to hours. And of course, we need to also talk about seasonal flexibility as well. But that flexibility comes from many sources, and one of which is the gas industry. But the gas scheduling protocols, et cetera, were not designed to provide flexibility to the electric power system. There was a lot of work at FERC on gas-electric coordination. I think a lot of parties got worn out from that, unfortunately, but it is a very important exercise. And I think there are some, in the scheme of things, some low-cost changes that could be made to improve the coordination between the gas side and the electric side to provide flexibility or even if you like the term fuel security or resilience, it provides all of those things.
I've heard that on both the planning side and on the operating side, Rob. Is that, you think there's more opportunity or more progress being made in one area than the other?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, ultimately, it's got to happen on the operational side, and planners can make whatever assumptions they make, and hopefully take a realistic view of what actually happens in the operational time frame.
Yeah. Okay. Going back to the resilience part of the discussion, you hear a lot of buzz these days about microgrids as a solution to resiliency, because so many of the resiliency concerns are not fuel related so much as they are maybe wind related, storm related, trees down, small pockets of maybe islanded grids possible, and microgrid being a proposed solution to that. What do you see as the outlook for microgrids in addressing the resiliency question?
Yeah, I do think it's an important opportunity in development. If you're, if you think again, anybody in the East Coast, I think, is likely to have some kind of tropical storm come through over the next 20 years, and it's going to knock out a large part of the distribution system. And then what do? And there's a lot of hospitals and police stations, and there are military facilities, and other regions have different threats. But if you think about hospitals and police stations and military facilities, compensating a generator 4 states away to be available and have on-site fuel, that's obviously a waste of money in terms of keeping service going for that facility. So those facilities generally do and should have backup generation. So whether it's just a specific customer with a specific backup generator, or whether it's a larger facility that maybe has multiple generators tied together in what you would call a microgrid, that is a good resilience option for that customer, or maybe groups of customers. So I do think states should be looking at that from sort of a public safety standpoint. I do think new technologies are helping provide options for that. Certainly the battery technologies that are around. But of course, you have to define the service that you want. Having 3 hours of extra service is not the same thing as covering a hospital for 5 days, right? So you really have to be careful about what product and what your need is in that instance.
Yeah, you may still have some of the similar fuel availability, fuel storage, fuel delivery concerns with the microgrids if you've got some kind of a thermal backup to a more environmental microgrid.
That's right.
Yeah. Rob, I saw in the electronic press this morning an announcement that kind of knocked my socks off. I've got it here from Utility Dive. It says, even in Indiana, new renewables are cheaper than existing coal plants. And it talked about the Northern Indiana Public Service Company doing its integrated resource plan analysis, saving customers more than $4 billion over 30 years by moving from 65% coal today to 15% coal in 2023 and eliminating the resource by 2028. It seems to me that ties in a lot to the discussion of fuel availability, fuel resiliency, loss of coal. What do you make of this, that Northern Indiana Public Service Company, which has not been known, I don't think, as a real renewable proponent, is finding it's cheaper and plans indeed to retire its coal fleet by the end of the 20s and replace it says here, with a portfolio of solar, storage, wind, and demand management as the most cost-effective, along with a small amount of market purchases from MISO. Did that catch you by surprise? Or?
That's great. Kudos to them. They're doing what every utility in the country should be doing, which is evaluating essentially a portfolio like that because of the lower costs of wind, PV, storage, and demand options, which I think really can beat out traditional peak generation options. It's great to see it in Indiana. I mean, we saw utilities like Mid-American, part of Berkshire Hathaway, in Iowa doing that, saving ratepayers money by replacing conventional plants with renewables. You know, that was happening 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And of course, they have great wind out there. Indiana has some pretty good resource, but it's no Iowa. It's also kind of an interesting story that, Charlie, when you and I got into this, Indiana didn't show up on any wind resource map, but when they started looking at the higher hub heights, I think it was around, I don't know, maybe about 10 years ago, suddenly Indiana popped out. So now that we have taller towers and we have good low wind speed turbines, some places like that have some really good opportunity that nobody thought would ever be developed.
Yeah. And have these options been explored vigorously, do you think, in the PJM and ISO New England situation, or are they found lacking or not really pursued vigorously?
Well, so, you know, in about, I don't know, half the country or 2/3 where they have traditional utility planning with integrated resource planning, you know, they're doing what NIPSCO did, which is looking at portfolios. Obviously, some doing it better than others, but you know, that's the question in the process. In the wholesale power market, restructured areas in PJM up through New York, New England, and then California, Texas. It's, you know, it's not based on a regulatory IRP, it's based on the market, but as we've discussed here, sometimes the market is really based on a set of rules that are somewhat subjective and designed by stakeholders, so it's not always an objective process.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks for those thoughts, Rob. It's about top of the hour, so we're going to have to wrap it up. And as I mentioned before, an email is going to go out with a presentation and an audio file once they've been posted. I want to let everybody know we really appreciate your engagement. We look forward to seeing you again at the next webinar. It's going to be Wednesday, November 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern. It's going to feature Patrick O'Connor from ORNL and Natalie Voisin from PNNL on behalf of the DOE Water Power Technologies Office. They'll address the questions of how hydropower fleet is operated today under increasing demands for flexibility, the potential to provide further flexibility, and how to extract that flexibility from the plant. It's a pretty timely topic on the national scene, giving all the interest in energy storage, and I hope everyone will be able to join us for that as well. And further information on this and all of our webinars and meetings can be found on the website at www.esig.energy under events and in the newsletters and informational emails. Rob, I want to thank you again for this very timely and informative webinar. I want to thank all of you on the line for your participation. Sorry for the audio difficulties we had, but I think we recovered from it pretty well. And we look forward to seeing you again next month. So thank you and take care.
Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.